Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Cricket Podcast with Pavan and Ravi. This is the second episode following our initial episode where we reviewed the historic Test series victory that India achieved in Australia. And this is the second part and the final part of our review of that same series. In our first discussion, we um, discussed about whether this is India's greatest Test series victory till date, and also who were the various heroes in this great achievement. If you want to have a complete listen to what was discussed, you can access the link to our episode number one of our brand new podcast channel and go and listen into both Ravi's and my views and also post your opinions. And we would love for you to agree to disagree and also suggest improvements for our future for podcasts. I would like to welcome my colleague Ravi again over here for this brand new episode. And as we move ahead in our discussion of the review of the test series against Australia, the next point, Ravi, I had in mind was we know that our resources were tested to the core. Our bench strength was tested like no other tour during this epic series,
Absolutely.
where we had to clutch the straws of whatever was available to us. And at one point of time, it looked like we would struggle to put a fit 11 out there on the park against this fully charged up Australian team. And I know that the Board of Control for Cricket in India gets flack for most of the times from the public in general on various host of issues, and seldom do they get credit. But do you think that is it time now to applaud the domestic programs and the junior cricketing programs that the BCCI has put in place, and finally the hard work of the last 20 years, I would say. I would consider 2000 as the benchmark year because that was the year when the National Cricket Academy in Bangalore was set up, and then a
Absolutely.
plan was laid out that was followed by the uh, TRDW wing, which was the brainchild of Makaran Vaigankar, who comes from Mumbai. And
Mhm.
the beneficiaries of this system were MS Dhoni and a lot of other players who came around from the tier two cities. And it sort of broke the shackles and gave access to people from all across the country to top level cricket. So, do you think that it finally the time has arrived wherein we need to give due credit where it's due to the BCCI and the programs that we have in place?
Absolutely. Lovely pointer. So basically, how I see it is, I don't want to kind of give an very MBA-ish answer, but I kind of see that the motivation for this is probably increasing the fan base and accordingly increasing the revenue base. And this all started with IPL. Due credit to Lalit Modi, of course, while the brainchild is there, while we have the infrastructure, while we have the economic and physical infrastructure and economic resources as well. What we've seen being tested now is also the potentially the T20 talent that we had. Okay, be it Washington Sundar or be it with Natarajan as well. Within IPL, within the scope of IPL, we've seen that these guys actually compete with the best of the world. They get to train with folks like AB de Villiers, also bowled with legends like Dale Steyn and whatnot. So, personally, I mean, if their target is to actually get into an IPL team, the way they're upskilling themselves within the domestic infrastructure is also being, upgraded with various facilities, and also the basic limits that each player is setting himself has also increased multifold. They're not just thinking about just making it to the first class team, but necessarily also looking at something bigger. Yeah, we've seen those examples with folks being picked up from streets of Rajasthan, or and also I've also seen that Mumbai Indians actually invest a lot in terms of their scouting. They've recently picked a guy from uh, Nagaland, if I'm not wrong, who's actually an amazing spinner apparently. Not very long ago, we've seen folks like Sandeep Lamichane from Nepal, who's now doing really well. Of course, he's from Nepal, but having said that, there's significant amount of the Indian influence as well that we actually tend to see, of at least in terms of the how the system is actually functioning. Uh, to be honest, is Natarajan our best bowler? No, but he was the only available bowler. Let's face it. So that's how even in maybe even in terms of Washington Sundar, he's not probably the best available spinner. Uh, of course, it's a different aspect when we look at Kuldeep Yadav's selection, and that discussion is altogether different. But we constantly have someone as a backup in India, but necessarily we tried and tested them because they've had the global exposure that they did in terms of IPL, in terms of competing with these players. So not just that, also the India A2s, which Siraj was part of overseas,
Yeah.
did actually help him a bit. Uh, he's known to do well in Australia, and Kohli's faith, and also he's had an amazing IPL, thankfully too. That really helped that aspect of it. Domestic structure is such that India is looking at probably India A, B, C, D, E teams. We have amazing players like Ruturaj Gaikwad, Anmol Preet Singh, Ishan Porel, Avesh Khan, Khalil, Akshar Patel also now is suddenly picked for the England tour, considering his left-hand prowess. We're talking about the bench strength that is miles down, as deep as Mariana Trench, if I'm not wrong. So uh, amazing. Kudos to BCCI here. Of course, the motivation is again, I'll say, largely with respect to improving infrastructure and also improving the finance or revenues models as well. That's where we are actually able to. This is more of a while the intention is to improve the revenue base, we are seeing the skill part being upscaled, and the quality, the improvement in quality is something as a byproduct, which has actually reaped as benefits. And also, not to mention the under 19 teams that we've been having. Uh, we've either been winning it or at least have played the finals, and we've been consistently doing really well. Of course, we're not seeing significant amount of players actually transitioning through, or while we do have the examples of Prithvi or Shubman, probably the playing 11 is so damn bloody good that you'll need some more players to actually fail to actually see these folks actually come up the order. So kudos to BCCI, credit where it's due. Um, so that's how I necessarily see it, Pawan Bhaiya. What's your view on it?
Yeah, fair point. I think you made a very good assumption in a nutshell of all the reasons why we have developed that bench strength. I also have a very pragmatic view about that. Of course, kudos to the BCCI. And if I go step by step, in all these years of watching cricket, one of the main things, firstly, that BCCI does in age level cricket, starting from the under 13s, followed by 15s, 17s, 19s,
Hmm.
when there is the interstate competition, they do not play the 20 over or the 50 over format anymore in those age groups. I think this is one of the best initiatives that the BCCI has undertaken. And in this
Hmm.
age group cricket, they play either 2 day or 3 day cricket, basically getting these youngsters used to days cricket, and also drilling it into their minds that if you want to make it to the top, you have to have the base of your game very strong. I've always believed the dictum that if you're strong enough to play Ranji Trophy or Test cricket, then you can easily adapt to the 50 over or the 20 over cricket, for sure. I think one of the key initiatives that BCCI has undertaken in the age level group cricket of eliminating the 20 over game altogether is reaping rich dividends. Point number one. And point number two, when it comes to under 19 cricket, um, one of the reasons why we were so fixated with under 19 level cricketers was, if you know, that is the only age level group tournament that is televised worldwide, which is the under 19 World Cup. And when there are a lot of eyeballs going on to these players at that point of age, whoever performed well in these tournaments was immediately drafted into the Indian national side, and
Absolutely.
they took the shortcut route, and that harmed the player more than it did good for them. Classic example of this is somebody like a Parthiv Patel or an Irfan Pathan. When you straight jacket these players, Yuvraj Singh is another one. But all these players, when they were, fast tracked into the Indian team post their exploits in the under 19 World Cup, because they were unknown quantities in international cricket, they performed very well in their first season because they were, something new for the opponents. They had not seen them. And come the second season, all the teams with all this analysis and technology around, they used to identify their flaws, and then they would, struggle in their second season. It was at that point of time that they would be sent back to playing domestic cricket and be asked to iron out their flaws, perform well in domestic cricket, and then take a comeback to the national team. All the cricketers that I listed had gone through this, where they had their honeymoon period in the first season and then struggled henceforth. Um, BCCI has done one good thing and done away with that policy as well. You don't see under 19 players who perform well in the under 19 World Cup being fast tracked into the Indian team anymore. Somebody like a Prithvi Shaw, like a Shubman Gill, and others as well who will be playing for India have been asked to play for the respective Ranji Trophy sides, prove their worth over there over a couple of seasons or 3 seasons, and then are drafted into the A side before they graduate into the Indian national side. So that is another thing which I think is very very heartwarming to see, and that changed approach from BCCI is helping them. You will seldom have a youngster who is 17 or 18 years old who will come in and start performing on an international stage and have a longish career. The last time we had a player was a certain Sachin Tendulkar who came in as a 16-year-old and played continuously for 24 years. You wouldn't have every youngster who would perform like that. So it's just like a rough diamond that is found out in the coal mines down there when the players are at the under 19 level, and you just keep on polishing that player, take them through the grind of domestic cricket, A cricket, and then that is the reason you see that once these guys reach the national team, like we saw on this tour of Australia, that they are ready to perform. And of
Mm.
course, the third point I would make is IPL. That 8 weeks that these domestic players spend with Indian international players and all the overseas players also uh, holds them in good stead. As my father always said when I used to play cricket, you can learn a lot by watching. And just watching these international stars, the way they go about their work ethics and the way they train and the way they, carry themselves, the youngsters learn a lot in these 8 weeks. And just to rub shoulders with, um, the who's who of international cricket during that 8 week period, and also having access to top international coaches, physios, just changes their mindset.
Absolutely.
And when they come on and play in international cricket, Shubman Gill would not have been intimidated facing Pat Cummins because he would have already faced a lot of him in the KKR nets, for example.
Correct.
So IPL is definitely a boon in that regard. And one final point about this, of course, as we know that earlier there used to be around 27 or 28 Ranji teams in India, which we thought was big enough, and they expanded that now to 38 or 39 teams. So increase in the quantity leads to dilution of quality, that's for sure. And if you see, that's the reason India has played close to 58 tour matches in the last 5 or 6 years, because that has become the route to go into the Indian national team. You just cannot be performing now in domestic cricket and stake a claim to be part of the Indian team, because, as I mentioned, there are a lot of teams in there, states like Pondicherry and the northeastern states, which are very new and are not having that same kind of players that would test you. So if somebody
Correct.
just sees the run charts at the end of the season, they wouldn't know whether these runs came against a quality bowling attack or a weakish team. Agree that we have the elite division and the plate division, but you know so for now I think the system has been developed in such a way that if you perform well in domestic cricket, you will get selected for the A team. So your first step is to get selected for the A team, and then once you have these A team tours, I think this is fantastic initiative from the BCCI to go on multiple A tours. And as you know that all these A tours happen shadow tours. If the senior Indian team is traveling Australia, then the A team is also going to England at the same time
Absolutely right.
and playing. And the evidence of that fact is, I was reading a couple of days ago that India are going to play two practice matches before the Test series against England, and those two practice matches are going to be India versus India A. You know, so That's absolutely fantastic, and that's the reason I think that all these points put together, the BCCI definitely deserves credit, and all the efforts in the last 20 years are now eventually starting to born fruit, and hopefully that's going to take Indian cricket from strength to strength going forward as well. So that, I think, in a nutshell, the 4 or 5 points that I mentioned has enabled India to um, keep on having that supply chain of almost international ready players, and which should hold them in good stead, for many years to come. And hopefully we can see an era of Indian domination across formats and across various geographies, is what I believe.
Certainly
Uh,
true. Yep, totally agreed with you. Uh, Actually, I had another, probably an extended discussion that I'd like to have on something that we briefly touched upon in the first episode. That is with respect to the status of Test cricket specifically, and how important was the Border Gavaskar Trophy 2020-21 in terms of actually, putting Test cricket back on pedestal for the next generation of, say, the millennials and the next generation of cricket fans.
Yeah, I think it's been a sort of a eureka moment for all the millennial cricket watchers, I believe, because in this era of having multiple T20 leagues spread across the various countries, this series has come as a sort of a savior for Test cricket, I would say. Not for people like us who have been the diehard romantics of Test cricket, but it has definitely put back Test cricket back on the pedestal. But as a cricket fan, I would still worry for the health of this format of this game, because the quality of Test cricket, Test playing nations is shrinking day by day. Um, you're going to obviously enjoy series only between the big three or the big four: England, New Zealand, India, and Australia. But
Mhm.
world cricket definitely needs a strong Pakistan, Sri Lanka, West Indies, and South Africa. South Africa, for example, I haven't seen a weaker team from them since the readmission into international cricket in 91, 92.
Absolutely.
Sri Lanka has a lot of political interference in their cricketing affairs. In Pakistan, similarly, have a lot of political interference and um, lack of proper administration and lack of good selection policies, which has led to decline in their Test cricket standards. And West Indies, with a lot of emphasis on T20 cricket and people migrating and going out to United States for greener pastures as far as their career is concerned, and basically becoming freelancers as far as T20 cricket is concerned, and going and playing across various leagues. I think that essence of playing the purest format of the game needs to be developed in these countries, and it is up to the home boards to do that. Because if you're only going to have 2 or 3, uh, good test playing teams, then it gets a bit boring from a cricketing fan point of view. But hopefully, this series does um, open up avenues for these boards, and they take it as a learning on themselves as well, and put in a long-term agenda to develop test cricketers in their country. And I
Hmm.
believe nations like Ireland and Afghanistan for sure needs to play more test cricket,
Absolutely.
because if they get opportunity, I can see them surpassing the likes of Bangladesh and even Pakistan and Sri Lanka in the longer run
Very true.
in
Very true.
producing good test cricket. And the only way the likes of Ireland, Afghanistan are going to improve their test cricket is by playing against the big boys. One off test match is absolutely fine. Just play one off test match, but do play with them. You cannot have the commercial angle come into picture every time. Otherwise, you'll see India touring England, Australia, you know, every year for either the white ball or the red ball, because money has become the name of the game for every board. Everybody wants India to tour their shores because of the money that brings in. So this series is definitely just like the 2001 series and the 2005 Ashes series. Um, And that is one of the reasons, in the last 20 odd years, you hardly remember these two or three series which were engrossing. I remember
True,
watching the
certainly.
2000. I remember watching the 2005 Ashes as a neutral fan, but you just were hooked on to every test match. And I'm sure that many neutral fans would have watched this India-Australia series. The kind of
Absolutely.
euphoria I saw among the fans in Pakistan and the worldwide with respect to the series, all of them were rooting for India, for example. They
That's
were
very true.
wanting India to win because they were the underdog without their first choice players and stuff like that. But that seldom happens, and I'm hopeful that this opens up new avenues for these countries and they, play Test cricket. And one thing I would like to say, this business of two Test match series going out of the window because that is absolutely abysmal to say the least. At least you should have a minimum three-match series between all these top eight Test nations. Played and on a regular basis. You cannot say that I don't want to tour West Indies, South Africa, because that's not going to generate revenue for me or put eyeballs on the TV when we are playing these sites. The onus is on these countries. If they develop their test teams like India, Australia will be forced to tour them, and it'll become much more competitive. The more the competitive, the better it is from a fan's perspective as well.
Well, certainly, yes. I kind of agree with almost all the points. I just had a couple of other aspects of the extended conversation with respect to how IPL played a role. And now specifically T20 has a role to play in itself with respect to Test cricket, and it's a vicious cycle. Let's face it. I mean, you'd want to see at least 3 to 5 T20s being played mandatorily, and you would not really bother if it's just a two test series that's been actually held right from South Africa. South African players do have a lot of issues in terms of their own demographic issues, or in terms of the racial issues. We see a lot of non-colored players actually take call pack deals and actually fly to England and probably pick up a county, because that's a lot more assuring in terms of career. And similarly the same is happening with West Indies there, where there's no sense of a proper, probably, I won't use the word nationalism, but it's a conglomerate, or it's a consolidation of 7 to 8 island countries which have their own very power centers, and so on and so forth. So as you rightly pointed out, it's very important for us to have a very healthy South African, West Indies, Sri Lanka, and also a Pakistan Test cricket team. In addition to that, this is what's been necessarily happening with the structure part. But I'd also like to highlight something that necessarily needs to improve in terms of the 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 guy who's actually watching the test match as well. One debate has been primarily about the intent part. I personally feel we need to celebrate test draws much more often. We've not been appreciating those guys who get off mark, probably of 40 balls. We're not really celebrating those folks who actually strike at have a strike rate of about 25, 30, and actually are tiring out players. Pujara gets criticism for the very same reason. I'm not just talking about the Rajiv Shuklas or Babul Supriyos or other foolish I'll say cricket fans, but also the largely the few intellectual ones are also pretty much making the same point, saying no, that's not necessarily the gameplay that you need to follow. I mean, it's a natural gameplay which comes in, and we need to celebrate more draws, is what I personally feel. I really love the Sydney test for that one reason. Of course, luck did favor us. Let's not forget that we actually lost one almost a full day due to rain. Similarly with Gaba as well, close to 35 to 40 overs, we never kind of the game result would have been absolutely different. Let's also acknowledge the fact that the rain did play its role. But having said that, there has to be some amount of change in terms of how any cricket watcher would actually approach the game of test cricket itself. Similarly, these guys are the ones who really were rooting for, say, someone like a KL Rahul making into the playing 11 just because he has a damn orange cap. I mean, I know I'm a bit radical or probably a bit pissed off or really infuriated or frustrated with such statements being made, but it's very important to kind of protect the red ball cricket. And in order to protect red ball cricket, first you need to actually fall in love with the form of it, the structure, the process, the weights, the realities, the weights. actually being managed by the cricket boards are all secondary. First, it's very important for us to first acknowledge what needs to be done is to not lose, not necessarily to win. That's how I personally feel. And just to make a point here, don't want to digress any further. Uh, Sydney Test, okay, we did end up with a draw, uh, but of course, there have been a lot of criticisms in terms of how Ashwin or Vihari have actually approached the game, the game. But what I personally think is, the injuries also happen to be, a blessing in disguise kind of a thing, wherein we actually saw rock solid, holding the fort kind of an approach from our folks, which is not often seen, or else it would have perhaps been just another Adelaide nightmare of 2014. So I personally think even that very moment was quite historic in terms of reviving Test cricket, because holding fort is something that we often tend to not give enough importance that it actually deserves. So that's my take on it, Pawan Bhai.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agreed. And when it's interesting when you say that, we need to celebrate the draws. Absolutely. But the only thing the millennial population would not do that would be there is such a scarcity of those exciting draws in modern day test cricket. And one of the, what do you call, boons of T20 cricket has been, uh, as a result of that, you don't see many test matches getting drawn.
Absolutely.
There is more intent as you mentioned, and so you hardly see a test match going into the fifth day in the current scenario. There is result in almost every test match, weather permitting, and it more or less gets over in 4 days. But you wouldn't have the exciting series that we just had in Australia if it was not for a 5 day test match. And people remember these series because it went down to the wire.
Absolutely.
And the bane of white ball cricket or the T20 format is you hardly have any players who know how to uh, save the game. You will have a certain Pujara, or I cannot recall any other modern day batsman who would bide their time and play cricket, test cricket in the old fashioned way, where Sunny G, the great Sunny G, would say, give the first session to the bowler and the next two
Mhm.
sessions are yours. So the reason why we don't find exciting drawn test matches is because there is great amount of lack of skill or temperament on part of the batsman
Mhm.
to just play that waiting game across all conditions and pitches. There's lack of patience and there's lack of tenacity, to play the waiting game. I think if more and more people develop that, it's very funny that the modern day pundits who also played Test cricket in a very conservative fashion come out and criticize players like Pujara, because
Mhm.
for every Kohli, Rahane, Rohit, you need a Pujara who is going to hold up an end, and your batting is
Absolutely.
going to revolve around that fort or that fulcrum. For every Tendulkar, um, Lakshman, Ganguly, and Sehwag, there had to be a Dravid,
Absolutely.
holding one end up, which gives you the assurance that I'm your life insurance, I'm your fixed term asset. You can go around and play the way you want to play. So it was so fascinating to watch that test match in Sydney. Firstly, when Pant and Pujara were going on, you cannot imagine two people who are poles apart involved in a partnership. Pant on one end, wanting to scare the daylights of the opposition out of the opposition, and Pujara, the saintly figure at the other end, trying to wear the opposition down. And then obviously you had Vihari and Ashwin doing what they did, and it was a advantage that because of their injuries they figured out which kind of bowlers that both of them would face, and that kept you hooked on. Some people criticize Test cricket. Oh, if it gets drawn, then what is the point of watching it for 5 days when at the end of the day there's going to be no result after 5 days? You have been fools wasting your time around for 5 days, but they do not understand even to get to that drawn situation, how much of hard work is involved from a player's perspective and so on and so forth. So I believe that this series has definitely, put Test cricket back on pedestal, and I hope that we take this opportunity. World cricket and the cricketing boards all around the world take this opportunity to just, preserve this. format of the game, because with due respect, you can have any amount of hundreds wickets in the 50 over format or a T20 format. But if you want to be remembered in the excellence of the game, you have to perform in the white flannels, as they say, for Test cricket. Um,
Absolutely,
so
yes.
yeah, considering
Lastly,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, considering paucity of time, we just have a couple of minutes before we wrap up this final piece of review of the Australian tour. And in our next episode, we'll be looking forward to the England series that is fast approaching us. So before we call it a day, did you want to say anything else, Ravi, from your end?
So one question I'd like to kind of ask everyone here, probably just think about it. What next for Aussies is something that's been kind of popping up. Uh, I just look at it one way. I think now they'll not necessarily take the moral high ground like they've been taking. They'll probably make Smith the captain, and maybe they've cancelled the tour with respect to South Africa. They don't care about World Test Championship. All that they want to do is probably redemption in terms of winning against England. In Australia. What's your view on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can take that across in a different segment, if you want, because I also have certain things in my mind that I wanted to put across, because they have a lot of work to do from their perspective, a lot of soul searching to do, and a decline in the standards of the domestic cricket is one of the key points which has led to,
Hmm.
lack of bench strength as far as Australian cricket is concerned, because they used to be the benchmark for us growing up. Everybody used to say their Sheffield cricket structure is so strong that Australia can field three teams at the international level, and all three of them would beat most of the international sides across the world. I think too much of investment into big bash league has thrown them at the deep end, and the result is for everybody to see. All the Australian Cricket Board wants is to rake in the big moolah via the big bash league. I think
Hmm.
some sort of balance needs to be given to that. They are at a disadvantage because all the cricket happens during summer, so they have to pitch in domestic cricket, BBL, everything during the summer. Whereas we here in India play the IPL during summer, and our domestic cricket scene is in winters. But that is
That's
something
right.
that we need to ponder over, and we can have a special segment related to that as well. Um,
Certainly yes. Certainly yes.
but thank you for your time today again, Ravi. It was a worthwhile discussion. And to our listeners and viewers, please do post comments on what you feel about this Test Series victory and whatever we had discussed. Please do, as I mentioned, agree to disagree and put forward your points as well. And with that, it's a wrap on the review of the Australian tour and the second episode of our podcast. We look forward to our next episode where we'll discuss the future state of affairs with the England series coming up. Thank you, Ravi, and thanks you, everyone.
Sure, Pawan bhai. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye bye.